Sarah Mitchell had always known her grandmother Eleanor as a quiet woman who kept to herself. When Eleanor passed away at 92, Sarah inherited the old Victorian house where 3 generations of Mitchell women had lived. The house felt heavy with memories and secrets that seemed to whisper from every corner. While cleaning out the dusty attic on a gray October morning, Sarah discovered something that would change everything she thought she knew about her family. Behind a loose floorboard, her fingers found a wooden box wrapped in faded silk. Inside lay dozens of black and white photographs, some dating back to the 1940s. Most showed people Sarah didn't recognize, but what caught her attention was how carefully they had been hidden. The photographs were organized by date, each batch tied with different colored ribbons. As Sarah examined them more closely, she noticed something strange. In several photos from different time periods, the same man appeared alongside various women who looked remarkably similar to each other. All the women had the distinctive Mitchell family features, the same deep-set eyes, the same delicate chin, the same way of tilting their head slightly when they smiled. What puzzled Sarah most was that according to family stories, the Mitchell women had always lived alone. Her grandmother had never mentioned having sisters or cousins. Sarah's own mother had died when Sarah was young, and Eleanor had raised her as an only child with no extended family. Yet here were photographs showing Eleanor as a young woman laughing with several other women who could have been her twins. At the bottom of the box, Sarah found a letter addressed to "My dearest ones" in Eleanor's handwriting. The paper was old and yellowed, but the words were clear. If someone is reading this, then the time has come to know the truth about our family. What I am about to tell you will seem impossible, but every word is real. We are not who we appear to be, and our family has been keeping a secret for over 70 years. Sarah's hands trembled as she read those words. She looked around the empty attic, feeling as though Eleanor's presence still lingered there, waiting for this moment. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the small window seemed to highlight certain photographs, as if guiding Sarah toward specific images. One photograph in particular drew her attention. It showed 5 women standing in front of what appeared to be the same Victorian house where Sarah now sat. All 5 women wore identical dresses and had identical smiles, but the strangest part was that they all looked exactly like Eleanor at different ages. One appeared to be in her 20s, another in her 30s, and so on, as if someone had photographed the same person across decades and somehow placed them all in the same image. Sarah turned the photograph over and found names written in Eleanor's careful script: Elizabeth, Margaret, Catherine, Dorothy, and Eleanor, the last 5. Below that, in different ink, someone had added, "Sarah must know. The cycle cannot continue." The temperature in the attic seemed to drop suddenly, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She gathered all the photographs and the letter, her mind racing with questions. Who were these women? Why did they all look like variations of Eleanor? And what did the letter mean by "the cycle cannot continue"? As she made her way downstairs, Sarah noticed something she had missed before: the family portraits hanging in the hallway showed generations of Mitchell women, and now that she looked closely, they all shared not just family resemblance, but an almost identical appearance. It was as if the same face had been copied and pasted across time, with only minor variations in hair and clothing styles. That evening, Sarah spread the photographs across Eleanor's old dining table and began organizing them chronologically. As she worked, patterns began to emerge that made her stomach turn with unease. Every 25 years, a new set of photographs appeared showing the same group of women, but with one face changed. It was as if every generation, one woman would disappear and a new one would take her place, while the others remained eerily unchanged. Sarah realized with growing horror that according to the dates on the most recent photographs, she should be the next one to join this mysterious group. The last photo in the collection showed 4 women standing in the same pose as earlier pictures, but with an empty space where a 5th person should have been standing. On the back, Eleanor had written, "Waiting for Sarah 2024. Sarah barely slept that night, her mind churning with impossible possibilities. When dawn broke, she decided to visit the local historical society, hoping to find records that might explain the photographs. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, had worked there for 40 years and knew more about local families than anyone else in town. Mrs. Henderson's face grew pale when Sarah showed her the photographs. The elderly woman's hands shook as she examined each image carefully. "Where did you find these?" she whispered, glancing around nervously as if someone might be listening. "In my grandmother's attic. Do you recognize any of these women?" Sarah asked, watching Mrs. Henderson's reaction closely. "I recognize all of them," Mrs. Henderson replied quietly. "That's what frightens me. Sarah, these women lived in your house over the past 70 years, but they were never all there at the same time. Elizabeth lived there in the 1950s, Margaret in the 1970s, Catherine in the 1990s. Each one lived alone just like your grandmother." Sarah felt her breath catch. "That's impossible. Look at this photograph. They're all together." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a thick record book from beneath the desk. "I've been keeping unofficial records of strange occurrences in this town for decades. Your house has always been unusual. Every 25 years or so, a woman moves in who looks remarkably similar to the previous resident. The neighbors whisper about it, but no one ever investigates too deeply." As Mrs. Henderson flipped through pages of handwritten notes, Sarah saw entries dating back to the 1940s. Each entry described the same pattern: a Mitchell woman living alone in the Victorian house, keeping to herself, aging normally for about 25 years, then suddenly disappearing. Within weeks, a younger woman who claimed to be a relative would arrive to take over the house. "The strangest part," Mrs. Henderson continued, "is that neighbors swear they sometimes see lights moving through the house at night, as if more people live there than just the one woman. And there are stories of voices, multiple women's voices coming from the house during thunderstorms." Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered nights as a child when she thought she heard her grandmother talking to someone, but when she investigated, Eleanor was always alone. Sarah had attributed it to the old woman talking to herself, but now she wondered if there had been others in the house all along. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1947. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes, sister takes over property." The photograph showed a woman who looked exactly like Eleanor, standing in front of the Victorian house. The caption identified her as Elizabeth Mitchell, who mysteriously disappeared last Tuesday. "Her sister Eleanor has arrived from out of town to care for the property. But Eleanor was my grandmother and she lived in that house for over 70 years, Sarah protested. "According to the official records, yes. But look at this." Mrs. Henderson showed Sarah a series of newspaper clippings spanning decades. Each one told the same story: a Mitchell woman disappearing and being replaced by a sister or cousin who looked nearly identical. Sarah studied the dates carefully. Every 25 years, like clockwork, a new woman took over the house. The most recent clipping was from 1999, announcing that Dorothy Mitchell has moved away to care for an elderly relative, and her cousin Eleanor Mitchell has arrived to maintain the family property. "Mrs. Henderson, are you telling me that my grandmother wasn't really my grandmother? That she was just the latest in a series of women pretending to be related to each other?" Mrs. Henderson closed the record book and leaned forward. "Sarah, I think something much stranger is happening in that house. I think all these women might actually be the same person, somehow maintaining their youth by cycling through different identities every 25 years. The idea was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed, but the evidence was mounting. She thought about Eleanor's remarkable health for her age, how she never seemed to forget anything despite claiming to be over 90, and how she had always discouraged Sarah from looking through old family albums or visiting the attic. "If that's true," Sarah said slowly, "then what happens to me? The photographs suggest I'm supposed to be next." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew grave. "According to my records, you're the first Mitchell woman to have been raised in the house from childhood. All the others arrived as adults. Maybe that changes things. Maybe that's why Eleanor left you those photographs, as a warning." Sarah gathered the clippings and photographs, her mind reeling with the implications. If Mrs. Henderson was right, Then the woman she had called grandmother her entire life was actually something else entirely. And worse, Sarah might be expected to participate in whatever dark ritual allowed these women to maintain their eternal cycle. As she walked home, Sarah noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. In the front window of her house, she could swear she saw a figure moving past the curtains. But she had locked the house when she left that morning, and she was certain she was the only one with a key. Sarah approached her front door carefully, her heart pounding. The key turned easily in the lock, just as she had left it. But as she stepped inside, she smelled something that made her blood freeze. Eleanor's distinctive lavender perfume, stronger than it had been even when her grandmother was alive. Sarah stood frozen in her hallway, the scent of lavender growing stronger with each breath. She called out tentatively, "Hello, is someone here?" Her voice echoed through the empty rooms, but no one answered. Yet she could not shake the feeling that she was not alone. Moving carefully through the house, Sarah noticed subtle changes that made her skin crawl. The family photographs along the hallway had been rearranged. Pictures that had hung in the same spots for years were now in different frames, and some showed faces she didn't remember seeing before. In one frame that had always held a photo of Eleanor as a young woman, there was now a picture of Sarah herself, but wearing clothes she had never owned, and standing in a location she had never visited. The living room felt different too. Furniture had been moved slightly, just enough to change the feel of the space. Eleanor's favorite chair now faced the window instead of the fireplace, and there were 5 teacups set out on the coffee table, each one filled with steaming tea as if guests were expected to arrive at any moment. Sarah's hands trembled as she approached the teacups. The china pattern was one she recognized from Eleanor's collection, but these particular cups had been packed away in the attic for years. Someone had not only entered her house, but had also gone through stored items and prepared for what appeared to be a gathering. A soft creaking sound from upstairs made Sarah's heart skip. Someone was definitely in the house. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace and slowly climbed the stairs, each step seeming louder than the last. The creaking continued, coming from Eleanor's old bedroom. When Sarah reached the top of the stairs, she saw that Eleanor's bedroom door was open, revealing a room that looked exactly as it had when her grandmother was alive. The bed was made with Eleanor's favorite quilt. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the nightstand, and clothes were laid out on the chair as if Eleanor was preparing to get dressed. But it was the mirror that made Sarah gasp. In the antique full-length mirror that had belonged to Eleanor, Sarah could see 5 women standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the women were still there, all wearing the same style of dress, and all bearing the unmistakable Mitchell family features. One of the women in the mirror, the one who looked exactly like Eleanor, stepped forward and began to speak. Sarah could not hear the words, but she could read the woman's lips. "It's time, Sarah. Join us." Sarah stumbled backward, knocking over the vase of flowers. Water spilled across the wooden floor, but when she looked down, she saw that the spilled water was forming letters. "Don't fight it. This is your destiny." Running from the room, Sarah rushed downstairs and grabbed her car keys. She needed to get away from the house and figure out what was happening to her. But as she reached for the front door, she found it wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door remained firmly sealed, as if something on the other side was holding it closed. The back door was similarly immovable. Even the windows refused to budge, despite not being painted shut. Sarah was trapped in the house, with whatever forces were trying to claim her. She pulled out her cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen showed full bars, but every call she attempted failed to connect. As darkness fell, the house began to change more dramatically. Photographs appeared on walls where none had hung before, all showing Sarah in various poses and locations she didn't remember. Some showed her standing with the same group of women from Eleanor's hidden collection, wearing old-fashioned clothes and smiling as if she had always been part of their mysterious sisterhood. The voices started around midnight. Soft at first, like whispers carried on the wind, but gradually growing clearer. Sarah could hear Eleanor's voice along with others she didn't recognize, all calling her name and urging her to come upstairs. The voices seemed to be coming from Eleanor's bedroom, where Sarah had seen the women in the mirror dot against her better judgment. Sarah found herself drawn back up the stairs. Each step felt predetermined, as if she were following a path that had been laid out for her long before she was born. The bedroom door stood open, and inside the mirror now showed a complete scene that looked like a gathering of old friends. The 5 women in the mirror were seated around a table set for tea, with one empty chair waiting. They gestured for Sarah to join them, their expressions kind but insistent. Eleanor's reflection caught Sarah's eyes and mouthed words that chilled her to the bone. "This is how we stay together forever. This is how the Mitchell women survive." Sarah realized with growing horror that these weren't just family spirits trying to communicate with her. These were the Mitchell women who had lived in this house over the decades, somehow trapped between worlds and sustained by bringing new members into their eternal circle. Every 25 years, they needed a new addition to maintain their existence, and Sarah was meant to be their latest recruit. The mirror began to glow with an otherworldly light, and Sarah felt an irresistible pull toward it. Her reflection started to change, showing her wearing the same style of dress as the other women and taking her place in the empty chair. She watched in terror as her mirror image smiled and raised a teacup in greeting to the others. But as her reflection joined the group in the mirror world, Sarah felt herself becoming weaker in the real world. She understood now that crossing over completely would mean leaving her physical form behind and becoming part of the eternal gathering. She would gain immortality, but lose her chance at a real life, forever trapped in the Victorian house with the other Mitchell women. Fighting against the supernatural pull of the mirror, Sarah forced herself to step backward. The women in the reflection looked disappointed, then concerned, then angry. Eleanor's mirror image stood up from the tea table and pressed her hands against the glass from the inside, her mouth moving urgently as she tried to communicate something important. Sarah strained to read Eleanor's lips in the mirror. The letter. Read the letter. Basement. Truth. Eleanor's reflection pointed downward repeatedly, gesturing toward the lower part of the house. Sarah remembered the letter she had found with the photographs, but in her panic she had not finished reading it completely. Racing downstairs, Sarah retrieved the letter from the dining room table where she had left the photographs scattered. By lamplight she read the parts she had missed in her earlier shock. Eleanor's handwriting continued. "The mirror is not our salvation. It is our prison. We thought we had found immortality, but we discovered too late that we had only found another kind of death. Sarah, you must break the cycle. In the basement behind the old coal furnace, you will find what you need to free us all." Sarah had never spent much time in the basement. It was dark and musty, filled with decades of stored furniture and old household items. But now, armed with a flashlight and Eleanor's cryptic instructions, she descended into the underground space that suddenly felt much more significant than she had ever realized. The basement was larger than she remembered, extending beyond the footprint of the house above. Behind the old coal furnace, just as Eleanor had written, Sarah found a loose stone in the foundation wall. When she pried it free, she discovered a hidden compartment containing another wooden box. This one much older than the first. Inside this box were documents that told a very different story from what Sarah had pieced together upstairs. The papers were written in multiple handwritings and dated back to 1923. They described 5 women who had purchased the Victorian house together after World War I, intending to create a spiritual commune where they could explore what they called the mysteries of life and death. According to the documents, the women had discovered an antique mirror at an estate sale, a piece that the seller claimed had belonged to a famous medium. They brought the mirror into their home and began using it for seances and attempts to contact the spirit world. The early entries in their shared journal described exciting breakthroughs in their spiritual work and feelings of profound connection to otherworldly forces. But the tone of the journal entries changed dramatically around 1925. The women wrote about feeling trapped in their own reflections, about seeing themselves in the mirror even when they were not standing in front of it, and about losing hours of time with no memory of where they had been. One entry, written in shaky handwriting, described how they had tried to remove the mirror from the house but found it impossible to move. as if it had become part of the structure itself. The final entries were the most disturbing. The women realized they were being slowly absorbed into the mirror world, existing more in their reflections than in reality. They wrote about attempts to escape the house, only to find themselves back inside with no memory of how they had returned. Their physical bodies grew weaker while their mirror selves grew stronger, until they existed almost entirely within the glass dot. But the most shocking revelation came in a letter dated 1947, written by Elizabeth, the first woman to disappear according to the newspaper clippings. She had not vanished mysteriously. She had discovered a way to temporarily escape the mirror's hold by finding a substitute. "I have learned that the mirror requires 5 souls to maintain its power," she wrote. "By bringing in a new person and convincing them to look into the glass, I can transfer my burden to them for exactly 25 years. Then I must return, and the cycle begins again." Sarah realized with sick understanding that the Mitchell women had not been seeking immortality. They had been taking turns serving a 25-year sentence in a supernatural prison. Each woman spent a quarter-century trapped in the mirror world, then was allowed to return to physical form by condemning another woman to take her place. The system had worked for decades because each woman, desperate to escape her mirror prison, willingly participated in condemning the next victim. They convinced themselves they were offering immortality and sisterhood, but they were actually perpetuating a cycle of supernatural imprisonment. Eleanor's final letter, hidden at the bottom of the basement box, revealed the full horror of Sarah's situation. "I cannot bear to condemn another innocent soul to this existence. Sarah was raised as my granddaughter, and I love her too much to trap her as the others trapped me. But the mirror grows hungry, and if we do not feed it a 5th soul soon, all of us will be destroyed entirely. Sarah, if you are reading this, you must find another way. Break the mirror. Burn the house. Do whatever it takes to free us all, even if it means our final death." Sarah looked up from the letter to find herself no longer alone in the basement. The 4 other Mitchell women stood around her in their physical forms, looking exactly as they had in the photographs, but translucent and shimmering like mirages. Their faces were filled with desperate hope as they waited to see what Sarah would choose. "Please," whispered Elizabeth, her voice hollow and distant. "We have been trapped for so long. Eleanor was right. This cycle must end, even if ending it destroys us." Sarah realized she faced an impossible choice: save herself by condemning another innocent person to the mirror prison, or find a way to destroy the supernatural trap that would likely kill all 5 women permanently. Either way, the comfortable life she had known was over, and she held the fate of 5 souls in her hands. Sarah looked into the desperate faces of the 4 Mitchell women surrounding her in the basement. Their translucent forms flickered like candle flames in a breeze, and she could see through them to the stone walls behind. These women had been trapped for nearly a century, taking turns in a hellish cycle that had consumed their lives and twisted their humanity. "There has to be another way," Sarah said firmly. "If the mirror needs 5 souls to maintain its power, what happens if we give it none? What if all of you refuse to participate in the cycle?" Margaret, who had been trapped since the 1970s, shook her head sadly. "We tried that once in 1963. When the time came to find a replacement, Catherine refused to bring in another victim. The mirror began pulling us all deeper into its realm. We started losing pieces of ourselves, memories, personalities, the ability to think clearly. By the end, we were barely conscious shadows. Catherine finally gave in and found a substitute just to save the rest of us from complete obliteration." "But Eleanor found something different," Dorothy interjected, her voice growing slightly stronger. "In her final years, she discovered that the mirror's power comes from a specific source. It's not just magic. It's connected to something physical that can be destroyed." The women led Sarah back upstairs to Eleanor's bedroom, where the mirror still glowed with otherworldly light. The reflection now showed an empty tea table, as if the mirror world was waiting for its inhabitants to return. Eleanor's ghostly form pointed to the ornate frame surrounding the glass. "Look at the symbols carved into the frame. Eleanor's voice whispered directly into Sarah's mind. I spent decades studying them. They're not decorative. They're binding runes that connect the mirror to its source of power. Sarah examined the frame closely with her flashlight. What she had always assumed were decorative flourishes were actually intricate symbols carved deep into the dark wood. Some looked like ancient letters, others like mystical diagrams. At the bottom of the frame, she found symbols that looked different from the rest. Newer, as if they had been added later. Those symbols at the bottom, Catherine said, reading Sarah's thoughts. They were carved by the original owners of the mirror, the people who created this trap. But they made a mistake. They included a release mechanism, probably as a safeguard in case they wanted to break free themselves. Eleanor's spirit grew more solid as she concentrated her energy. I discovered that if someone willingly sacrifices themselves, truly willingly, not under coercion or desperation, the binding can be broken. But it requires giving up not just life but also any chance of an afterlife. Complete obliteration in exchange for freedom for all the trapped souls. Sarah felt her heart sink. The solution required someone to make the ultimate sacrifice, erasing themselves from existence entirely to save the others. There has to be another way. What if we all work together? What if we combine our energy to overload the mirror somehow? The women exchanged glances filled with decades of hopeless experience. Elizabeth spoke softly. We've tried everything, Sarah. The only thing we never tried was willing self-sacrifice because none of us could bring ourselves to choose complete non-existence. Even trapped in the mirror, we still existed. This would be nothing. Sarah stared at the mirror, her mind racing through possibilities. Then she noticed something the others seemed to have missed. The newest symbols at the bottom of the frame were not quite the same as the others. They were carved more roughly as if done in haste. And more importantly, they showed signs of recent disturbance. Eleanor, Sarah said urgently, did you try to alter these symbols? Some of them look like they've been changed. Eleanor's ghostly form smiled for the first time since appearing. I spent my last months trying to modify the binding. I couldn't break it, but I found a way to change its nature. Instead of requiring a willing sacrifice, I tried to create a different release mechanism, one that would require all 5 souls to reject the mirror simultaneously. You mean if all 5 of us refuse to participate, refuse to feed the mirror new victims and actively resist its pull all at the same time, it might work? Sarah asked hopefully. It might, Eleanor admitted, but I died before I could test it. And I could only modify part of the binding. The original spell is incredibly powerful, and I'm not sure my changes were sufficient. Sarah looked around at the 4 trapped women. We have to try. If we do nothing, I'll eventually be forced to find someone else to take my place, and the cycle will continue forever. At least this way, we have a chance to end it. The women nodded solemnly, understanding that they were choosing between uncertain freedom and guaranteed eternal imprisonment. Sarah positioned herself in front of the mirror, with the 4 spirits forming a circle around her. On my count, Sarah said, taking a deep breath. We all reject the mirror together. We refuse its power, refuse to participate in its cycle, and demand our freedom. 3, 2, 1. We reject you, all 5 women shouted in unison. The mirror's surface began to ripple like water, and the light emanating from it flickered wildly. Sarah felt an enormous pulling sensation, as if the mirror was trying to drag her into its realm by force. The 4 spirits around her grew more solid as they resisted, pouring all their remaining energy into their rejection of the supernatural trap. But something was wrong. The mirror was fighting back harder than expected, and Sarah could feel herself being drawn inexorably toward the glass. Eleanor's modified symbols were glowing, but so were the original binding runes, and it was clear that the 2 magical systems were at war with each other. The battle between Eleanor's modified symbols and the original binding runes created a supernatural storm in the bedroom. Furniture rattled, windows cracked, and the very air seemed to vibrate with competing magical forces. Sarah felt herself being pulled in 2 directions at once, toward the mirror by the original spell, and away from it by Eleanor's alterations. The four Mitchell women poured every ounce of their remaining spiritual energy into the fight, their forms growing brighter and more solid with the effort. But Sarah could see they were weakening rapidly. Decades of imprisonment had drained their strength, and they couldn't maintain this level of resistance much longer. "It's not enough," Margaret cried out, her voice strained with effort. "The original binding is too strong." Sarah's feet began, sliding across the floor toward the mirror despite her desperate attempts to resist. The glass surface was now churning like a whirlpool, ready to pull her into the mirror world where she would join the eternal cycle of imprisonment. But then Sarah remembered something from Eleanor's hidden letters. The mirror had been purchased at an estate sale in 1923. It hadn't been created by the Mitchell women. It had been created by someone else who had probably died long ago. If the original creators were dead, their binding spell might be vulnerable in ways that living participants couldn't exploit. "Eleanor!" Sarah shouted over the supernatural wind that was now whipping through the room. Who created this mirror, originally? What happened to them? Eleanor's ghostly form struggled to answer as she fought against the mirror's pull. The estate sale. It belonged to a medium named Madame Cordelia. She died in 1922. Mysterious circumstances. Sarah's mind raced. If Madame Cordelia had died while bound to the mirror, her soul might still be trapped somewhere within the magical construct. The five Mitchell women had been cycling through imprisonment. But what if there was a sixth soul that had been permanently trapped since the beginning? "We need to find Madame Cordelia," Sarah yelled. "She might be the key to breaking this." Sarah stopped fighting against the mirror's pull and instead allowed herself to be drawn closer to its surface. The four Mitchell women cried out in alarm, thinking she was giving up. But Sarah pressed her hands against the glass and shouted, "Madame Cordelia, if you're in there, help us. Help us break free." For a moment nothing happened. Then the surface of the mirror began to change, showing not the familiar tea room where the Mitchell women had been trapped, but a different scene entirely. Sarah found herself looking into what appeared to be a Victorian parlor, filled with candles and spiritual paraphernalia. In the center of the room sat a woman in elaborate robes, her eyes wide with terror as shadowy figures circled around her. She's been trapped at the center of the mirror this whole time, Sarah realized. The Mitchell women were in the outer layer, but Madame Cordelia has been in the core, powering the entire spell. The image of Madame Cordelia looked up and made eye contact with Sarah through the glass. Her mouth moved urgently. "Break the source," Eleanor's spirit suddenly understood. The mirror itself isn't the trap, it's just a window. The real binding is underneath in the foundation of the house. That's why we could never move the mirror. Sarah pulled away from the glass and ran toward the door. But the supernatural storm in the room had intensified to the point where she could barely move. The Mitchell women were fading rapidly, their energy nearly depleted from fighting the mirror's pull. "Go," Elizabeth gasped. "We'll hold it off as long as we can." Sarah forced her way downstairs and back into the basement, following her instincts toward the hidden compartment where she had found Eleanor's documents. But now she looked deeper, using her flashlight to examine the foundation stones behind. Where the box had been hidden, their comma carved directly into the cornerstone of the house's foundation, Sarah found an intricate symbol that matched the most complex rune on the mirror's frame. This was the source, the foundation stone that anchored the mirror's power to the physical world. Sarah grabbed a sledgehammer from Eleanor's tool collection and began attacking the carved stone. Each blow sent shockwaves through the house, and she could hear the mirror upstairs cracking with each impact. The supernatural storm intensified, but now it felt different. Less controlled, more chaotic, as if the carefully constructed spell was beginning to unravel. With a final, desperate swing, Sarah shattered the cornerstone completely. The carved symbol split into fragments, and immediately the house fell silent. The oppressive magical atmosphere vanished, replaced by the normal quiet of an old house settling in the night. Sarah raced back upstairs to find the mirror had gone completely dark. Its surface reflected nothing but the ordinary bedroom around it. The four Mitchell women stood in the room, but now they looked different, more solid, more real, and somehow at peace. "Is it over?" Sarah asked breathlessly. Eleanor nodded, tears of relief streaming down her now solid face. We're free, all of us, including Madame Cordelia. I can feel it. The binding is broken completely. One by one, the four women began to glow with a warm golden light. They were not disappearing, Sarah realized, but transforming, moving on to whatever came after their long imprisonment. Thank you, Elizabeth said, as her form began to fade into light. You gave us something we thought we'd lost forever, the chance to truly rest. The other women echoed her gratitude as they too transformed into peaceful light and disappeared. Eleanor was the last to go, pausing to embrace Sarah one final time. You were always my real granddaughter, Eleanor whispered. Blood doesn't matter, love does. Live the life we never could, Sarah, live freely. As Eleanor's spirit finally found peace and faded away, Sarah found herself alone in the ordinary bedroom of an ordinary house. The mirror was now nothing more than an antique reflecting glass, showing only Sarah's own relieved face. Sarah Mitchell had broken a century-old supernatural cycle and freed 5 trapped souls. More importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from facing the unknown, but from choosing to break cycles that others accept as inevitable. The Victorian house was finally just a house again, and Sarah was free to decide her own destiny.